Zoom. Okay. Thank you first off for all attending. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Can I have roll call, please?
Chair Gross.
Here.
Vice Chair DeBolt.
Here.
Commissioner Andre.
Here.
Commissioner Quilty.
Here.
Commissioner Lowe.
Here.
Commissioner Riley.
Here.
And Commissioner Sofocanic, absent.
Thank you. Would you all stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
To the republic.
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That sounds so weird when it breaks up like that. Do I have any oral communications that is not on tonight's agenda?
No, we didn't receive anyone to speak by the 4 o'clock cutoff time.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask for an approval of minutes for January 27th first. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, that was Art and Mary. Thank you. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Motion passes. Approval for the minutes for March 24th. Everybody, oh, you want to do a roll call?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's do a roll call. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Chair Gross.
Here, yes.
Vice Chair DeBolt.
Aye.
Commissioner Andre.
Aye.
Commissioner Quilty.
Aye.
Commissioner Lowe.
Aye.
Commissioner Riley.
Aye.
And Commissioner Sofocanic, absent.
Thank you. Okay, do I have approval for the March 24th, 2021 minutes?
Move approval.
Do I have a second? Were you approving, Larry?
For
The March 24th minutes, I have a motion by Art. Do I have a second?
to make sure I was there.
Okay,
I'll second it.
okay, thank you. All those in favor, we'll do a roll call vote.
Chair Gross.
Aye.
Vice Chair DeBolt.
Aye.
Commissioner Andre.
I'm double checking to make sure that I was at that meeting. That was a while ago. Well, that was last month.
I think you were there.
Never mind. No, I was there. Yeah, sorry. I know I
Commissioner
was thinking that was, I was thinking it was 2 months ago.
Yeah, Mary Ann was not there. I
Yeah.
think.
Right.
I abstained.
Commissioner Lowe.
Aye.
Commissioner Riley.
Aye.
And Commissioner Sofocanic, absent.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have nothing on the consent calendar, so we will go to public hearing.
Can I make
Uh-huh.
a correction? Because I think for the January 27th meeting, I think I was not at that one. I was mixed up on which minutes we were approving. So
Okay.
I would abstain from the January 27th
Okay, we have
meeting vote.
3, 4. We still have enough to pass it.
Okay.
So we can have you abstain. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, public hearing for the site development. That's a continuation from our last meeting. Do we have any reports?
Yes, Chair Gross. Chair Gross and members of the Planning Commission Site Development Permit 2101 is the continued consideration of a permit application proposing the construction of a 5,200 square foot, 2-story medical building to replace 2 existing single-family homes at 4562 Catella and 11002 Saratoga Drive. The applicant's here with us tonight, Elizabeth Craig, and she's brought other folks with her too. This is a continued public hearing from the March 24th meeting. In the March meeting, staff recommended denial of the site development permit. However, during the meeting, the Planning Commission directed staff to bring back a resolution of approval. That draft resolution of approval is presented tonight to you. The proposed building meets the requirements of the zoning code for parking, access, development standards, refuse, and landscaping as shown as in your staff report. That was in both last month's and this month's staff report. It was mentioned. The applicant requests a waiver of the installment to install the designated loading space, as a medical building usually doesn't have large loading that they need to do from time to time, and it is an office building. The director can waive this requirement if the project were to be approved. And in order to approve the site development permit, the Planning Commission must make the findings from Municipal Code Section 1744060, and staff has responded to each of these finding questions in the attached resolution that you have, and it's based on commissioner comments from last month's meeting discussion. Of particular interest, it's noted that staff has added conditions 20 through 22 in the resolution to mitigate the privacy issues that were talked about. These conditions consider fencing, windowsill height on the second floor, and buffering trees. I went past the buildings next door today to this site, and the medical building right next door, the fence in the back is 6 feet tall, and the one behind Dr. Cheng's office is 8 feet tall, in case you're wondering about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if the commission would like to approve the resolution, staff would introduce 2 corrections to the language in the resolution. In condition 24, the number of spaces should be written out as 26 spaces and not as 37 spaces as it's in the document. And then in condition number 34, the words power pole or street lights should say power poles or power lines. And with those changes, staff recommends approval of the draft resolution for site development permit 2101. And that concludes my report. It would be a good time to also ask the applicant if they would like to speak, or after you have spoken to each other as commission. All right.
Thank you. Great report.
Thanks.
The first thing I want to know is, do we have anybody that has sent any letters that we don't know about? Or do we have anybody here to speak?
I haven't been notified of any.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody from the commission have any questions of Oliver?
I do. Regarding the fence along the rear, I noticed that it was on the drawings, it was 5 feet, and you kind of, I was going to go do the same thing you did. I was going to drive over there today. I didn't make it over there to see what the heights were. I think that fence should be at least 6 feet along that rear wall, or along the rear line, property line, the southerly line. Again, just for privacy for the neighbors.
Right.
5 feet seems a little low to me.
Is 6 feet tall enough?
I believe in the report, Tom, in the condition of use, it says here the southern
I see it.
wall
I'm
shall
sorry.
be 8 feet.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
it's
sorry.
8 feet.
I just saw it right now. Number 20. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's
number
fine.
20.
That's
Okay.
That's fine. I'm fine.
Does anybody else have a question or a comment they'd like clarified? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up for the applicant to speak, and we don't have anybody here in the audience who is wanting to speak.
Not that I've been notified.
So let's open the hearing for the applicant.
Thank you, City Planning Commission, for this opportunity. One thing I did want to add, Tom, to your resolution is that we did agree to take care of the lighting as well, to make sure the lighting does not impede on the neighbors. So we will also be making sure that happens as well. And I think that's the only thing we needed to add. And we look forward to your decision here shortly.
Okay. That's actually in.
One other thing I would like to bring up. One other thing I would like to bring up is that the building is about 3,200 on the bottom, and then there's about 2,000 on top. And the 2,000 square feet is to the, presently to the east. We just want to move the second floor to the west instead of to the east. It just lays out better with it to the west and
more privacy for the neighbors?
and more privacy for the neighbors as well.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing, and our drawings will reflect that. It's not changing anything else. It's just the second story will be shifted over from one side of the building to the other.
Do the commissioners have any questions of the applicant?
No.
Is this any problem with the city for them to shift it over without coming back?
No, as the building department receives it next, they'll check it and they send it to me again, and I take a look and go through all of the requirements once again and make sure that it works. It really shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Chair, if I may, the one thing I would add to that, if there is a motion to approve the project as presented, we may want to add in that motion the authority for community development staff to approve the modified site plan as detailed by the applicant this evening.
Okay. Is that in agreement with the other commissioners?
Yes.
Yes.
So, I do have one question maybe of the applicant. Do you know what type of medical you are looking at doing? Or do you have that planned out at all?
It's kind of open at this point, possibly a lab of some sort. We're in the process of reviewing a bunch of different opportunities here, but it's going to stay with the mainstream of what's going on throughout the Catella Boulevard. So, and obviously those applicants would have to go through a certificate of use, I'm sure, to make sure it's approved by the city. So you guys will definitely be informed of that when the applicants come through. We're going to try to get them on board sooner than later. So during construction, we could get the interior built out as well. But if that doesn't happen, then it'll follow really quickly, because we do have some prospective tenants already, but we're just reviewing that right now.
Okay. That'll be good. Great location. So do I have a motion to approve with the additions, the corrections that we had in the item 24 and the item on the polls that Tom Oliver brought to, and the recommendations from our city attorney?
I'll make that motion to approve the project and give staff the authorization to correct the site plan and to the changes that were described in the meeting.
I'll second. Yeah.
Roll call?
Chair Gross,
Agree.
Vice Chair DeBolt,
Aye.
Commissioner Andre,
Aye.
Commissioner Colty,
Abstain,
Commissioner
since
Lowe,
I wasn't at the last meeting.
Aye.
Commissioner Riley,
Aye.
and Commissioner Suffolk-Canning, absent.
Motion passes. Congratulations and good luck.
There's silence.
Thank you very much. We very much appreciate it. You guys have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Too. Okay, we need let's give a second. Okay, you ready? Staff report on the town center.
All right. Good evening, Commission. I'm going to kick it off real quick. And over the past several months, the city's town center mixed-use team has been working on creating a strategic plan of the town center. This will help increase economic development, attract businesses, provide developers an easier path for project, and of course, to hopefully address the city's regional housing needs assessment RENA numbers. So in the staff report, it details the area of the town center mixed use, the TCMU. And so we went into a contract with the consultant, Placework, And our lead for place work is Mr. Alan Loomis. I'll have Mr. Alan Loomis introduce his team. But again, the TCMU development is to create a strategic plan for the city town center. So before tonight, place work has gone out to do surveys. I believe they surveyed the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission nominated Commissioner Lowe to do a one-on-one interview with place work. Place work has also interviewed one-on-one our city council members, and they also had held workshop with stakeholders or property owners of the town center mixed use. So tonight is just a progress report or an update on where we're at so far. And we've been kind of promoting it out to the public so they can view the progress report and also add comments or ask questions. And so I encourage the commission tonight to do the same. So I will kick it over to Mr. Alan Loomis. And again, he's with Placework and he'll introduce his team.
And we also need to set up Alan's computer for sharing. You've done that? Okay. So you can share your screen, Alan.
All right, everybody should be seeing the opening slide. Well, thank you, Ron, for the introduction, and thank you, Commission, for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. Very excited to bring the project to you this evening for your input and your thoughts regarding the town center in Los Alamitos. As Ron mentioned, and the lead on this project for Placeworks, I'm a principal in the company and leading our urban design practice. I'm joined tonight by Logan Woodruff, whose project designer has been assisting on this, and many of the lovely drawings you'll see in the presentation are the work of Logan. Logan has also helped set up a number of the surveys, tools that some of you have interacted with that we'll speak to shortly. So as we get started on this, I'm actually going to ask Tom Oliver to speak to the planning context that we entered into when we were engaged to work on this effort towards the very end of last year. So, Tom.
Thanks, Alan. This is kind of a fourth step in a long march toward a goal of making this more of a downtown area. The first thing we did was we did a SCAG grant a few years ago, as you may remember, called the Boulevard Project. And that was to kind of design what things we wanted in the neighborhood, what the residents wanted. And they were polled at that time about what their top 10 issues in the neighborhood were and all that stuff. So that was the first step. And then the next step was the general plan. And the general plan put it into the city's main dream for the future. And then the zoning code last year actually made the laws for this neighborhood. And then this year we applied for an SB2 grant from the state, and they gave us money to hire a consultant to come up with this strategic plan. And that's where we're at tonight. So this is a lot of the discussion of this you've already had in the past, and tonight will be more brass tacks type stuff. So do speak up about it. Thank you, Alan.
All right, thanks, Tom. So for just to recontextualize where we're, the area we're looking at, the town center, it's the area highlighted here in yellow called out plan area. Bullet number 1 is St. Isidore, it's a kind of point of reference. The plan area of the town center encompasses 3 of the corners at Catella and Los Alamitos. And of course, as the commission knows, the 4th corner is outside of the city limits and the county area neighborhood of Rossmore. But the town center is kind of strategically positioned amongst a number of other community assets that are just outside the limits of the town center. So number 2 is City Hall off to the west. To the north, number 6 is the high school, and number 3, just 1 block away to the east, is the hospital and the medical center area. So the town center is those few blocks you see there. It amounts to about 20 acres of actual parcels of land. That 20 acres does not include the streets, and it extends south, as you can see, down Los Alamitos Boulevard up to, but not including, the Vaughn's Shopping Center complex. Going to the north, it goes up to Florista, and then it's 1 block east off of Los Alamitos Boulevard, and 2 blocks to the east from Los Alamitos. And you can see the number of other kind of community assets and kind of businesses that are sort of located in close proximity. As Tom indicated, this area is all encompassed through the town center mixed use zoning district. So that's the very dark red color here. So the good news is that the zoning to enable a mixed use town center is actually already in place. And if I was to kind of summarize the charge that we've been given through the grant and by city staff, it's that you have the zoning in place. The rules are there to create a mixed use town center, but we're really charged with trying to give those rules some visual form and some kind of direction so that as applicants come forward, not only are they complying with the zoning standards, but they're also delivering buildings or building types and development that actually helps to incrementally build up a town center that the community would like to see happen in physical form. And although you do have the mixed use zoning in place, one of the other studies we did was looking at the mix of actual uses on the ground, and it's a real hodgepodge. There is a number of single story kind of commercial buildings and retail buildings. Some of them are newer, some of them are relatively old and probably at the end of their lifespan. There's a variety of institutional and kind of community-oriented structures, mostly located on Reagan Street. You've got some banks. So it's a real mix of different kind of uses. What's notably absent for the most part in this area is housing. And of course, the mixed-use zoning district enables housing, and one of the goals of the various city plans, including with the housing element under discussion, is to encourage housing development in this area. So you'll see some, as we move forward, some projections about what we think some of the housing potential is within this zoning district. We also looked at the amount of pavement in the area, and as the commission, I'm sure, is very well aware, with a number of these older one-story strip malls and retail centers, there's an awful lot of surface parking in the general town center area. So that's, on the one hand, sort of good news from kind of development potential. There's not a lot that needs to be removed, but it does bring up the question of what is the appropriate amount of parking for the kinds of uses that the city would like to see in this area. So getting to what we heard, so as Ron mentioned, we had talked to all of the council members, and we got a surprising unanimity of opinion about what the council would like to see in the town center. And I have to say, in many communities, the various communities I've worked in over the years, I have almost never talked to all 5 council members individually and had them say very much the same thing. So the council is very interested in promoting a similar vision for the town center. So you can see some of the bullets here. We won't read through all of them, but I will say one of the things that was very compelling from a number of the council members that we talked to was a desire to see the town center area develop with a good amount of restaurant and cafe uses. There's a recognition that retail is not likely to be the anchor for your town center, but restaurant, cafe is a very promising sort of anchor. One of the things we heard is that there's very much an interest in having a place that the city, the community, and residents of Los Alamitos can gather that is neither the parks nor the schools. It's something that the city seems to be lacking. And so the town center is viewed as a place where the community can gather that's outside those 2 other kind of important destinations. Part of that idea and the kind of mixing it up with the restaurant anchored development is that it's a place where the entire community can gather. So the second to last bullet of having a place for young people, families with children, seniors, the entire community could gather here and find something that would be attractive to them. So we also heard from a number of folks about the desirability of creating a place where the teenagers, as they leave the high school, for example, can come down to the town center for coffee, have a safe place to hang out and do homework and meet each other before they head home for the end of the day. So we certainly heard a number of other topics, but those are a few that really stood out for us. There is, of course, a number of challenges here that council members also identified. As I said, building a town center that's based around retail was a challenge in pre-COVID times, and certainly in the past year as retail has really contracted and taken a beating. It's an even deeper challenge. And one of the things we just spoke with Tom about is another challenge with anchoring the town center around retail is that pretty much every retailer you want is within about a 2-mile driving distance of the corner of Los Alamitos and Catella. The retail market is very saturated around the city. So it's gonna be very hard to find a retailer that's not within that immediate vicinity that would want to locate in the town center. Another issue is you've already got built out parcels and it's a mix of ownership within those parcels, and maybe not every property owner is interested in doing development in the area. So how do we encourage them to think bigger than the existing properties that they have? And how do you accommodate the businesses that want to stay is clearly an issue. The other one that came out, of course, is that both Los Al and Catella Boulevards are very heavily trafficked. So how do we move traffic off of those streets into the town center without increasing congestion on those two streets, particularly as you're arriving to find a place to park for what hopefully is an attractive destination. Clearly is going to be a challenge that the city will have to work through, and we hope we'll have some ideas to help you think through that. As was mentioned, we also did a survey that was sent out to the Planning Commission. I believe we had 4 of you, the commissioners, respond to this survey, and we had about 12 of the 30-something property owners respond to this survey as well. The survey really is not a statistical survey in a kind of scientific sense. We really pursued it in lieu of actually being able to talk to people in person. And a pre-COVID era, we probably would have walked the streets and knocked on everybody's door and tried to meet with all the business and property owners and talk to them in person. But under the COVID circumstances that we started this project in early part of this year, we used the survey as an alternative tool. And so we heard a number of similar concerns that came out of the conversations with council members. And so, as I said, there's actually a pretty strong unanimity about the sort of intent of what the town center could be for the city of Los Alamitos. So we started drawing different scenarios and talking to city staff about some of the different options and sort of pursuits that we could have. And what we're going to share with you is a slightly modified version of material that we shared with the stakeholders in the stakeholder meeting that Ron mentioned earlier and is mentioned in the staff report. We characterized the different scenarios we looked at into sort of 3 different broad strategies. But all 3 scenarios carry some pretty common elements. So the first, and this goes back to the idea of it being a town center, is that all 3 scenarios incorporate some form of town square. And what that shape of that town square looks like, you know, the sort of features of it, the materiality of the finishes, whether it has a fountain or trees, all that's to be determined. But all 3 of the scenarios you'll see incorporate a town square. And all of them are roughly, as drawn, are roughly 100 feet by 150 feet. And that is the scale of the town square, the sort of reddish image on the very bottom there. That is that precedent image is the One Colorado Courtyard in Old Pasadena, a very attractive place. It hosts all sorts of different kinds of events, but when you actually map it, it's relatively small. So we use that as just a kind of template as we thought about the scale of a town square within the Los Alamitos town center. The other thing you'll see is that we began, as we sort of started thinking about this, we began to think that Pine Street between Catella and Florista was really the best place to create a Main Street type experience. Clearly, Los Alamitos and Catella Boulevards are too wide, too much traffic to create a kind of pedestrian-oriented Main Street shopping experience. Pine Street seemed to be just about the right length, just about the right width, and had conveniently also visibility onto Catella. So it wouldn't be sort of lost. You drive down Catella and you'd see there's some activity there. The other reason we sort of began to focus on Pine Street is that because it's not a significant street from the standpoint of moving traffic around the city, it's one that you could imagine that one block between Catella and Florista could be closed for the kind of large scale community events that you might want to host in the town center. So these would be the kinds of events that, may occur, probably no more than once a month, but maybe even no more than 6 times a year, maybe only a few times a year, but you would close the streets, you might bring out food trucks, all sorts of different activities, and you invite the entire town, the entire city to come out for some sort of event that's hosted on the street. So some of the images you see on the screen, you've got the sort of the brick or the kind of granite pavers in the street. Some of these are curbless streets. They're all streets that are really designed to host these kinds of events and be closed to vehicles from time to time and easily adapt to kind of a street festival sort of experience. So with that in mind, the other piece that we're sort of thinking about, you won't necessarily see it in the drawings, but I think it's gonna be a key component of thinking about how the street works is various kinds of temporary, movable street activation strategies that we've seen a lot of in the past year as cities have really kind of tried to rethink how the streets are used, particularly as restaurants have had to move their dining experience outdoors. So whether that's outdoor dining with the picnic tables or the outdoor chess, these are all tools that I think are going to be important strategies and kind of tactics with it in activating the town center. Another element that we looked at is some form of structured parking. We have a couple of different scenarios and thoughts about kind of structured or consolidated parking, but all of the scenarios we looked at assume that there is some amount of consolidated shared parking for the commercial uses within the town center. There's a couple different approaches we have to this, but all of them assume that there'll be some form of shared parking. And in many cases, we're showing it in a small scale, 3 to 4 story high parking structure. Final element that we have is that we are introducing some new building types into the mix of the town center. Right now you have standalone 1-story commercial, you have some mixed use, mostly some ground floor retail, but office above, you have straight on office within the town center, but as mentioned, relatively little housing. So one of the components that we've sort of drawn up and we think has some potential in the area is the 3-story townhouse, like you see in the bottom. This is a development type that is very well known in Orange County and Los Angeles County. It's being built in Los Alamitos today. It seems that there's a infinite appetite for these kinds of townhomes. As soon as they're built and opened up, they seem to sell out. So this is a very well-known kind of construction technique and housing typology in the area. The one that we're introducing that's a little less familiar to Los Alamitos, but is known in places like Anaheim or Long Beach as mixed-use development, like you see on the top. So mixed-use development is where you have retail on the ground floor and, of course, some 2 or 3 floors of housing located above. I will say, typically what ends up happening is that the mixed-use development tends to be rental property, whereas the townhomes almost always are condo or ownership property. It's entirely possible to do a mixed-use project and make it ownership, but typically we end up seeing them be a rental in our experience. So these are the 2 additional building types, particularly related to housing, that we've introduced into our kind of thinking for the town center. So as we sort of drew those up in different scenarios, it said we really began to focus on Pine Street, the 1 block between Catella and Florista, as being kind of the main street experience. And that means in our thinking, that became the place where the mixed use development we just showed would tend to cluster, with the sort of surrounding properties in the town center area sort of taking more of maybe a residential emphasis. We looked at Reagan Street and we saw there's a lot of community services and kind of nonprofits located on that street, anchored by St. Isidore. Those are all important community assets, so we really see that block maintaining its current character of uses. But the other key idea we introduced here is the 2 green streets highlighting green. So running north-south, Reagan Street is really the optimum street to connect the neighborhoods south of Catella on Green, Howard, and Farquhar up to the town center in a safe manner for pedestrians and cyclists. And we've even encouraged the city staff to start thinking about locating a traffic light at the corner of Catella, at the intersection of Catella and Reagan, to make that an even safer crossing. The same holds true east-west for Florista. If you go further east off, or west off the image, you end up in front of the city hall and connect with other neighborhoods. So Florista already has a traffic light at Los Alamitos. But Florista also, as you continue west, it eventually takes you up to the door of the medical center. And clearly connecting with the medical center and making a kind of an attractive pedestrian access from the medical center to the town center is an important component of making any kind of retail or restaurant experience in the town center successful. So those become our kind of two primary pedestrian streets that connect to the surrounding neighborhoods. Whereas, as I mentioned before, Pine Street becomes really the main street experience. So as I said, we end up kind of characterizing our kind of design thinking into three different scenarios. So one of them is really heavy with the public kind of taking the lead. And so in this scenario, the public sector, i.e. the city, would end up either through direct property acquisition or through some sort of RFP or kind of stronger form of development review than is typical, would encourage the site where currently Citibank is located to develop with the town square at the corner of Catella and Pine Street, but on the east side of that corner, as you see here. That would allow it to have a really powerful kind of direct pedestrian connection to the plaza at St. Isidore. You'd really reinforce the kind of historic center of the city through that. The plaza, St. Isidore being connected, has a really kind of powerful placemaking potential. So the positives there is that positive placemaking potential, the positive of having a plaza located at the town square located on Catella is great from a kind of visibility. Motorists coming up and down Catella will see there is a place there and hopefully be encouraged to pull off and visit the town center. The drawback, of course, is that the city has to make a pretty significant commitment and probably ultimately a significant commitment of money to be able to sort of enable that to happen. We're showing elsewhere in these drawings a variety of other possible buildings. We'll get into what we think is potential for those sites a little bit later in the presentation, but for now you can focus on the location of this kind of town square. Another scenario is one where the private sector really takes the lead in this. And so in this case, we're showing the entire block between Los Alamitos, Pine, Catella, and Florista being a kind of large-scale singular development where a single property owner or developer really takes the lead on building out the town square, building a parking garage that probably largely serves their uses, but not the other uses. And they build a centralized town square. This is similar to the model of Old Pasadena. That town square I showed you is actually part of a shopping mall. It's privately owned, privately managed, privately programmed, even though it's all publicly accessible. The advantage here is that the city has relatively little commitment of cost. Another advantage is that the programming and kind of look of the town square is all done under one development. The disadvantage is that that square in the middle of that block really only benefits one or two property owners. It doesn't really have a lot of spin-off benefit to the other properties. However, as you can see, we also showed this sort of town square at the corner of Pine and Catella we showed earlier. So these various schemes are, they're almost like a kit of parts, if you will. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive at this point. Another scenario is that there is a public-private partnership, and this is a case where the city still puts forward a kind of commitments of funds, but does so in partnership with a private developer, and together the city and the developer end up building out the town square and the parking structure to support the surrounding uses. The drawbacks on this scenario is that it does mean that the city has to engage in some extended negotiations with a private property owner, and that could ultimately sort of make this process very long of sort of jump-starting the town center project. But there are three very different sort of scenarios, a sort of very private, a very public-oriented. The public really leads and tries to make things start. A private scenario in which the private sector really takes the lead, and then a public-private scenario where there's much more of a kind of handshake agreement and kind of walking arm in arm. So these are what these scenarios tend to look like if we sort of extrude them into 3 dimensions. All the buildings that we're showing, and this is the basis of our capacity analysis, we'll bring up momentarily, we're showing all these buildings no more than 4 stories tall. And that's something we had heard talking to stakeholders, council members, is that the height of the new hotel is really about the top most height that we can imagine. And that's, essentially a 4-story building. So that's kind of what we've looked at. As you can see, we're not getting into kind of architectural character, kind of what style these buildings are at this point. It's really just kind of what are the possibilities of kind of development and kind of how these scenarios might play out in 3 dimensions. So here's a private scenario, a big parking garage built by a private developer to support private commercial development with a kind of plaza in the middle of it. And then a public-private scenario in which there's a large parking structure, but it's built within a structure that includes a town square and therefore, is part of a private-public partnership in terms of development and also in terms of cost. So as I said, we were looking at a number of sites, and so we identified a variety of sites that seem to have the greatest prospect or possibility of potentially developing over the next 10 or 15 years. So that's the A through M sites that we've itemized out here. So we've excluded, for example, the Bank of America at the corner of Catella and Los Alamitos, the McDonald's, some of the newer kind of medical office buildings on Howard and Green Street, for example, the CVS, the gas station. There are a variety of sites that we just don't think have a kind of high potential or high probability of being redeveloped or recycled in a 10 or 15-year timeframe. But these A through M sites are. And we looked at all of these from the possibility of what if they were developed at 60 units an acre. Now this is twice what your zoning allows. Your zoning in this area allows for 30 units an acre, but we said, what if you develop at 60 units an acre? What would be the overall development possibility in the town center? And the number, if you add all these up, is a little over 600 total units. Now, as we'll show shortly, that's probably not likely that all these sites would develop at that kind of intensity. And it's also not likely that all these sites will develop. If all these sites were to develop, that's almost 30% of the acreage within the town center being developed. And that's an extraordinarily high number. 20% is a neighborhood, 20% of land being redeveloped is a neighborhood that's experiencing tremendous growth. So this at 30% would be completely unprecedented, I think. But it gives you a sense of kind of what the possibility is in terms of development potential within the town center. So we looked at a couple of specific sites just to test our assumptions here. So the first one is the southeast corner of Pine and Florista. This site is currently developed with parking lots. And so we looked at what if we did a mixed-use building, a 4-story mixed-use building on this site with 1 level of underground parking. We don't have a financial analysis on this yet, but it seems that 1 level of underground parking is probably about the limit of what developers would entertain. So in this particular site, we get about 65 parking spaces plus or minus in that basement level. The ground floor, we have shown in red, is going to be some form of retail or commercial space fronting out onto Pine Street. There's going to be some parking behind that you access off the alley. It's roughly 30 cars, plus or minus. And then facing Florista Street to the north is highlighted in this kind of yellowy orange color. That's going to be the lobbies and maybe like a recreation room for the residential that's located above on floors 2 through 4. We took the gross square footage of that residential area on those floors, factored in a kind of efficiency. We need some space for stairwells, elevators, hallways, et cetera. And then divided that net square footage by 900 square feet. That seems like, for the purposes of this exercise at this point, a good average unit size. Your studio units might be closer to 600 square feet. 1 and 2 bedroom units might be closer to 1,200 square feet. So as an average, 900 square feet. In this case, That turns out to be a 42 unit building that could yield about 42 residential units. And as you can see, that turns out to be about 67 units per acre. Now, if you tried to correlate the actual parking requirements you have in your code with those units and the commercial square footage, it's going to be more parking than this scenario provides. So if an actual developer was to look at this site, they'd probably end up saying, well, maybe I'll just do less units so I don't have to dig deeper underground for parking. Or maybe they would come up with some other scenario by which they could provide the parking. They might utilize the state density bonus and bring some affordable housing to the table. They might choose other sort of techniques to sort of make this, these numbers sort of match up. But this was just for the moment a kind of good test to sort of see whether 60 units an acre was something that was a reasonable possibility. So we looked at the corner south of Catella from St. Isidore and kind of ran the same sort of scenario and came up with similar sort of numbers. In this case, it was closer to 70 units an acre. So we're kind of in the same territory. Again, the numbers of what we can provide parking with this scenario doesn't exactly match up with the number of units if you try and tie it super tightly to your utilizing your current code standards. So somebody would who's going to develop this would ultimately need to kind of fine tune this particular scenario. So we ended up walking away from these two studies thinking that this idea of a podium scenario, one level underground, retail fronting on the ground floor fronting out onto Commercial Street with some parking behind and 2-3 floors of housing above, actually seemed pretty reasonable and is going to deliver about 60 units an acre if it was developed in these kinds of scenarios. Now, the other site we looked at is the NSPS site. This is essentially the entire block of at the northeast corner of Los Alamitos and Catella. It's almost entirely under one ownership. And so this is the singular ownership. So we looked at this same podium scenario, one level of underground parking, retail and some parking at the ground floor, and then 3 floors of housing above. And you can see how the numbers sort of came out in this particular scenario. It's actually a pretty intense kind of development. This would be by far one of the biggest buildings in Los Alamitos if it was built out this way. Another scenario that we looked at, this is called the WRAP. In this case, what happens, and this is very familiar apartment typology in Orange County, where you build an above grade parking structure and then you surround it with wood frame construction. So the advantage here is that you're not digging a huge hole, so there's some cost savings. Apartment dwellers tend to like this, developers like this, because you can literally park at the same floor as your apartment and you just walk horizontally up from your car down the hallway to your apartment. You don't have to navigate stairs and elevators out of an underground garage. In this case, we also assumed that the ground floor would be developed as commercial, and you can see how the numbers begin to shake out here. This scenario, a little less dense than the podium scenario with all the underground parking, but potentially when we look at the economics of this, this may make more sense from a financial perspective because the construction costs of this are going to be somewhat lower than building a big underground hole. And then the other scenario we looked at for this site was one where it was all commercial development, no housing. This is the one that has the plaza, as you can see, kind of in the center of the block, and a big parking structure to support commercial development on the site. Here we assumed it'd be like a 5-story parking structure, would look like a 4-story parking structure because the floor to floors on parking structures is lower than they are for residential. So we get a pretty significant amount of parking provided out of this, significantly more parking that would be needed for a 1-story commercial development as drawn here. So I think in this scenario, what would be likely to happen is that a number of those commercial buildings would ultimately be mixed-use buildings, probably with some form of office on the upper floors. So we looked at all these scenarios, and these various scenarios, as I said, we ended up coming away from this thinking that the assumptions that 60 units an acre is not an unreasonable number to think is the very upper limit of what's possible from a development standpoint on the town center, that seemed like a reasonable sort of operating assumption for now, knowing that that's actually twice the density of what the code allows today. and that number would probably be dialed down as developers tried to calibrate the amount of square footage they were putting on a site with the amount of parking that they were willing to pay for and what scenario they were going to look at and how they were going to accommodate parking. So another, related to parking, another thing we ended up looking at was what could you do with Pine Street? As I mentioned, all of these scenarios, we think about Pine as being your main street. And so we began to think, what if you were to rebuild Pine Street? It's a very wide street and pretty underutilized in terms of its capacity for on-street parking. What could you do? What sort of streetscape would you like to see on Pine Street that would really be conducive to the town center experience that has been described? So the first scenario we looked at is a pretty conventional street with diagonal parking, one lane of traffic in each direction, diagonal parking. We also sort of illustrated, the possibility of a kind of large landscape plaza in the middle of the street. The precedent is Main Street in Newhall, up in Santa Clarita. In the image you can see here, looks like a one-way street, but that's because they're using it, the street's closed down for a classic car festival and they've got all the cars pointing in the same direction. So really great precedent for thinking about how a street with diagonal parking could work for community events. Has very wide sidewalks, very nice landscaping. So in this particular scenario, we think you could increase the amount of parking you provide on Pine Street, maybe up to about 30 cars. Pine Street currently has about 66 cars parked on the street in the public right of way. And depending on whether you do the outdoor plaza, how we accommodate the sort of existing curb cuts, the driveways and parking lots when they eventually close, a street of this nature could provide maybe upwards of 90 cars parked on Pine Street. Another scenario is kind of the same idea, but we said, what if you did something a little bit unconventional and you just did perpendicular parking, head-in parking? So there's a project, it's actually an alley in Glendale, but it looks like a street where that's more or less the case. It's a mixture of head-in parking on one side, and the other side is head-in parking and some parallel parking. Because this scenario, which otherwise looks the same as the previous one, because it's a little bit more efficient about how it accommodates existing curb cuts and driveways, et cetera, it starts to bring in more parking onto the street. So as you can see, potentially doubling the amount of parking that's on the street, on Pine Street today. And then the third scenario we looked at for Pine Street is what we ended up calling the Lancaster model, because the precedent for this is up in Lancaster, California. And if you look at the street image there, what you see is one lane of travel in each direction, parallel parking at the curb on both sides of the street, but the diagonal parking is located down the center of the street. It's a very unconventional way of organizing the street. But as you can see, what it allows the city to do is to provide pretty significant tree canopy in the middle of the street. The diagonal parking in Lancaster in the center of the street also has a kind of cobblestone paving and street lighting, and actually the kind of cafe string lights over it. And so it becomes the great space that's used when they close the street for community events and festivals. The sort of food truck festivals, the farmers markets, et cetera, all take up that space where the diagonal parking is located. And this also yields a pretty significant amount of parking on Pine Street. Again, potentially up to 130 spaces. But even at the lower end, it brings more parking spaces onto Pine Street than the other two scenarios, because it largely avoids the complication of the existing driveways at the curbs servicing existing businesses. So you build all this diagonal parking and it's right there from the very beginning. Now, where this is important is because one of the questions we began asking ourselves as we started drawing the development scenarios for the different sites that we showed you earlier is we thought, what if we were able to say all that commercial development, the new restaurants, et cetera, that we'd like to see locate in the town center, what if their parking did not need to be provided on site? Either it's going into a parking structure or potentially here onto Pine Street. So we were very, very interested in seeing how many cars we could park on Pine Street through a streetscape project, because a streetscape project could be significantly less expensive than building a parking structure. And at the end of the day, you'll have a great streetscape and a great environment where you can have the kind of community festivals that we've heard is a desire of the town center. You build a large parking structure, you spend millions of dollars, and at the end of the day, you basically have a giant concrete box. For a fraction of the cost, you can provide a significant amount of parking on Pine Street and have a great streetscape. So this becomes another one of the equation points in terms of thinking about the development capacity of the various sites is what if those development sites, particularly the ones that have frontage on Pine Street, do not have to provide parking for whatever commercial uses they bring up to the site. Maybe they only have to provide parking for the residential uses because Pine Street or a parking structure is picking up all the commercial parking that's needed in this part of the town center. So all three of these schemes for Pine Street, again, it's a kit of parts. You could pick any one of these schemes and match it up with the different development scenarios we showed, different locations for the town center. You can see in this version, we show the possibility that the town square located that connects to St. Isidore sort of squeezes out a little bit into Pine Street. So you could have like a gateway monument, whether it's a giant clock tower or a giant fountain that sort of sticks its way out into the street. That's the sort of orange X located in the lower left of the image. But by and large, these are sort of still part of a kit of parts, and we're very interested in hearing the commission's thinking about what seems to be the most optimum kit of parts. So staff had also asked us to think a little bit and begin to develop a menu of the different options the city has for financing pretty significant public improvements. So you can obviously go chase after state grants. That's how our contract with the city's been paid for. But our contract is a fraction of the cost of building some of these large scale public improvements, but there are state grants and likely to be state grants in the future for various kinds of public improvements. There's, of course, at the bottom of that list, there's also local revenues, whether that's kind of local taxes, or just kind of coming out of a dedication out of the capital improvement fund of the city on a kind of annual basis. Certainly local revenues can be brought to the table. But there are three other options that are also of interest and different cities are exploring. One is an assessment district. An assessment district is essentially you draw a boundary around the property owners and based on a kind of formula that's either based on street frontage or property size, basically they're assessed a new tax that is probably drawn over a 30-year period, and then the city can potentially bond against those future revenues to pay for parking structure or streetscape improvement. This is, for example, how the parking structures in downtown Santa Monica were built some 30 years ago. The other two tool two districts, a Mello-Roos district and an EFID or Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District, are somewhat similar tools, but they have a somewhat more complicated pathway to getting adopted. But an assessment district, only the property owners impacted would need to vote on the district. The other two really end up needing to be a vote to the entire population of the city. So they kind of get the same results, but there's somewhat more cumbersome pathway getting there. And I will say there's been a lot of interest since redevelopment was disbanded in the EFIDs. Relatively few cities have managed to stand these up. It's a fairly complicated pathway to set up an enhanced infrastructure financing district. But one of the things we've committed to staff doing as we kind of move forward with this is really think about these different options and kind of provide the city with a menu of possibilities and the kind of pros and cons of pursuing any of these options for funding some pretty significant public improvements. So you're not having to rely on kind of annual budget allocations. So with that, our presentation is done. I thank you very much for your time, and we are open for discussion and questions. And like I said, at this point, we have a set of ideas on the table. Very interested in hearing the Planning Commission's thoughts and feedbacks on this. We'll take your input to heart, fine-tune our pencils and our pixels on our computer screens, and kind of revisit these schemes and come back to another stakeholder group and then another public discussion as we sort of eliminate some possibilities and focus in on the kind of more promising ones. So as I said, with that, I'm finished, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. That was a great presentation. How many other commissions will be reviewing this?
We will possibly take it to the Traffic Commission, but I'll let Ron answer that probably. the one in charge of that commission?
Yeah, right now, we're still discussing it, but, our plans is, we're not, tentative plans is we're not gonna go to any other commission. The only body that might be hearing this would be the city council.
Okay, thank you. Does any of,
Chair Gross,
yes,
if you don't mind, since Gary, Commissioner Lowe was, chosen by the planning commission to do the one-on-one interview, I
Yeah.
don't know if he has anything to, say, because he was the one that was allowed to do the one-on-one.
thank you, yes. Chair Lowe, I'm not sure where you're at because I don't see you on the screen at the moment,
Okay.
but could you give us an update? There you are.
Yeah. No, so I did engage with Alan and Logan and had a good discussion, and a lot of the points that he mentioned today were we discussed as well. I don't have anything specific, that I wanted to point out or anything like that, but yeah, I mean, a lot of the points that he mentioned, we did discuss, but that's about it.
Okay, thank you. Do any of the other commissioners have any questions?
I guess just a comment from me. I like the idea of the utilizing pine as where the bulk, maybe the bulk of the parking would be for any other development adjacent to it. Going to the west or whatever. I'm not a fan of a parking structure. I don't know that people would use a parking structure. Quite honestly, I think more people would probably prefer to park at ground level and walk over, across the street, like they're doing right now, more or less. It's just that if you really did a nice job on Pine with adequate parking and the landscaping, I mean, I can see how that would be I think that alone would be a real draw, just because it would be inviting, and then whatever other plan is utilized in that shopping center, or what we have right now, the hodgepodge over there. I guess that just depends on where it goes, but for sure, I like the idea of Pine being landscaped and improved and set out for parking. What they did in Lancaster, I think, is really, really interesting. That's my comment at this point.
Do I have any other commissioners who have some questions or comments?
I have a comment. I agree with Art. Like, I really liked the Pine Street version, but being controller and being very practical with finances, like, I'm not sure how this is going to be made to happen, and the housing element in that area, that's like the busiest intersection in the area. Putting 60 units per acre, I can't imagine, especially when Cypress is putting 300 and something homes down Catella, that's going to add a ton more traffic. I just can't imagine putting dense housing right at that intersection. But I agree with Art, the one that had the, parking down the middle with the trees, it looks lovely. I mean, it's a great utopia, but the city just we raised sales tax to take care of our deficit, and it's going to be a while before we catch up there. So I don't see that, I mean, it would be great if we could get the private sector to do it, but I just not sure how practical that is.
Thank you. Do you have any other commissioners that would like to make a comment? Okay. I would say this, you made the comment about light at Cattell and Reagan, so I really think that should be a discussion with the Traffic Commission, and so that they can do the appropriate evaluation there, but I don't think it's a bad idea. I see a lot of problems with that intersection, but that again would be the Traffic Commission. I like the idea, kind of go along with both Art and Marianne and the way the street looked in Lancaster. I think that's a really good idea. We've already had a couple of events with the Recreation Department with Trunk or Treat and then the Easter Carnival, and those were both wonderful events, worked out very well. And it would be nice to see us utilizing that as a draw to get more entertainment and things going through the Recreation Department for them. I think that all of this was great. I actually took time, thank you very much, Maria, for bringing me a colored copy because I don't have a color printer, but I do appreciate it. So I took it and shared this with a lot of people yesterday and at work today. The feedback from everybody has been 100% positive. They thought it looked very nice. One of them even made the comment that she not only liked the drawings and the concept of us trying to move toward this direction, but the fact that we put the mediums down the boulevard here, she just thought that really added a lot to our town of that alone. She's a Rossmore resident. So she said that was really nice, and she enjoys coming over here and utilizing our restaurants and that. So that would be a good drawing point to keep them all coming over to our direction. So I think we also have to take a look at not just that retail is kind of a questionable thing. We're not going to be putting any big retail stores in. We don't have the property that would do it or the draw. But we have to look at where is the economy going and how we're going to shop, and what we're going to do and see what we can't bring into our area away from the other people, whether it's retail, what type of business, whether it's restaurants. So those are things that I think we have to keep in mind. And I think we did a good job of looking at it here through your plans and your analysis of what we could do in our city. But other than that, I don't have any other comments or questions.
Well, I want to thank you for your input. Very useful tonight. Appreciate that you took the initiative to sort of shop the plan around with your colleagues and friends. Chair Gross.
You're welcome.
It's a good litmus test to have people outside of the commission sort of see this, provide some feedback. So I will conclude that Tom or Ron, let you kind of talk about next steps or kind of where we go from here and our kind of the feedback we've received.
Can I'd like to just, sorry, I meant to speak up earlier, but I was muted. So I kind of wanted to, I mean, I like the idea of what you guys are proposing here. I don't know, I guess I don't really understand the mechanics of how a public-private partnership would work. You know, what a private initiated version of this looks like. Is it just us trying to incentivize somebody to develop it? I have concerns about the public initiated just because of budgetary concerns, right? So I think if I had a better understanding of kind of like the mechanics of how some of these different scenarios would work, it would be helpful. And then the other thing, you know, I know Art mentioned, you know, no parking structure, but I think if we're going to be adding that kind of density, you know, for residents down there, they've got to park somewhere, right? And I think a parking structure would be necessary in a mixed use kind of application like this, just because where are all the people that are going to live there going to park, right? Not to mention, I mean, you have ground level businesses, okay, people can go park in the surrounding neighborhoods, and then that's going to create a parking issue for those residents, right? So I think if we're going to have that kind of density, and I'm in favor of this mixed use, I really am, but I think a parking structure would absolutely be necessary in order to just offer a place for the people that are living there to park, because there's just not going to be enough street parking. And then, yeah, I think that Lancaster idea, you know, it is eye-catching, but all of them, I think, are appealing in their own regard. I think my least favorite is probably the perpendicular parking. So that's kind of my 2 cents there.
Thank you, Commissioner Riley. If I can, Chair, answer a couple of those questions. So try and dive in a little bit more on the different scenarios. We can certainly come back and kind of outline how that would work with, you know, some bullet points or kind of that you could actually digest in an upcoming meeting or other forum. But generally, yeah, the fully private initiated project would be one that is not terribly different than the way the city operates today. You've set up the zoning standards that developers can operate in. The only difference would be that you would really be trying to cajole property owners to deliver on the vision that you have through maybe some augmented design guidelines, you know, or really kind of trying to strong arm them or shop plans around to the particular property owners. But you would by and large with the private initiated one, you know, really expect that private developers are going to deliver what they think is the highest and best use for the property, and the city would sort of play chess with them as the next set of properties came on board. The public-private partnership would be one in which the city might approach one of the larger property owners or a collection of property owners and say, we'd really like to see this town center come to fruition in a particular way. And we as the city are willing to put forward resources that that the city has to that end. So the most obvious one would be that the city would commit some financial money to the project. So maybe that's the city committing a certain amount of money to help build a parking structure, for example. Alternatively, it may be that the city says, we're not going to commit money to build the parking structure, but we're going to commit to having long-term leases in those parking structures. So you as a private property owner then could sort of pull out a loan to finance a larger parking structure because you have this commitment that the city is going to, for a certain period of time, lease X amount of parking spaces in that structure. So there are different ways that deal could be structured in terms of the city's financial commitment. The city actually owns a very small parking lot on Pine Street. So that's another kind of token that the city has to say, we're going to contribute the small amount of land that we have to help put this stuff together. And you as a developer get to build on it. So there's a number of different ways that could be structured, but we'll come back with some kind of more detailed thinking about how the different deals and kind of scenarios could work from the kind of mechanics as you've requested. Relative to the parking for residential, the way we drew this up, and this was the purpose of doing these kind of various test scenarios, was that we're thinking that if you're developing your property in Los Alamitos for residential, that the required residential parking for those units is provided on site. I think it's extraordinarily unlikely that in North Orange County, people are going to rent an apartment and park across the street in a public parking garage and walk across the street. I think just the market demand is people are going to want to have parking, secure parking on site where their front door is located. So the various scenarios that we did was really in a large measure about testing whether we could provide an adequate amount of parking to make these kind of density numbers even believable. And like I said, we're close. An actual developer would kind of calibrate that a little bit more tightly than we did for drawings. So the parking structure really became a kind of tool by which, or Pine Street with parking, really became a tool by which we said, maybe one of the ways to kind of jumpstart things is to say, you could build a mixed use building. All you have to provide is the residential parking on site because parking required for whatever commercial restaurants, et cetera, office space is in a parking structure or provided with on-street parking. And so that was kind of where we started looking at Pine Street parking capacity pretty seriously as an alternative to doing a parking garage. But our assumption was residential parking is going to be parked on site, not in a separate parking garage located somewhere else.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
I'd like to add that several of the commission express, concerns about the budget or the financials of it, and that's absolutely true. But what I want to say is that I kind of see this as some of you guys got to see the active transportation plan. We need a plan in place, so therefore it could direct us as a city staff and us as a community to move forward that goal, right? So you need a plan in place. So yeah, we're going to run into some financial issues. We're going to run into several other issues, but we need to start off with step A, and that's to develop a plan. So then we can move towards that goal. And I'm not going to sit there and say it's going to be easy, but again, it just provides direction to the staff, provides direction to the community that this is the goal that we want to go, whether it takes 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years, but this is the marching orders that we're going to go forward.
Sure.
And I'd like to add too, if I could, Chair Gross, this is a long-term plan. It's as we can see, we did the Boulevards project, and what we got out of it was a hotel and medians down the middle of LaSalle Boulevard in 10 years, almost 10 years. And this will take a long time. And what part of the consideration of this is our arena numbers as well. As you may have seen, we are required by the state to find space for 767 new homes, and part of that will be eaten up in areas that are still open, if there are any left, and some of that will end up being ADUs in backyards on either side of you. And it would be really nice if we could, I've heard a lot of negative about ADUs and stuff like that. And if you don't want the ADUs, you need to put them in these numbers in another area. So in order to please the state, we also need to think of residential in this neighborhood as well. So that's why that's a part of it. And as far as the striping the streets and things like that, we make small changes to streets through the years, and they end up looking like something completely different over time. And so if we had a goal towards this project, we would do a little bit at a time, and eventually just through natural repair of the street, we would end up with the Lancaster model, for instance,
So for my children, they'll get to see this maybe.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still, Tom, that number, because I read the Kennedy Center letter today when Maria sent it to us, and it's still mind-boggling that our 2 square mile city can be required to have that much. Like, there's no fighting that, and that's not a topic, sorry, so maybe we can't talk about it. Michael, sorry, apologize. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I thought the plan and the concept, to me, I explained this as a concept of where we hope to go, that we've worked on our zoning. We've been trying to kind of bring it into what we hope the best for our city, and looking at everything for the future. I think this is a great idea. Maybe what would be nice if we have some questions over the next week that we could email Ron and Tom and let them know, and so that maybe our speaker can answer our questions at the next meeting. And that's a possibility if that's an agreement with Ron and Tom as well. But anything that we can review this and come up with some of our thoughts. Is that acceptable for everybody?
So if you 2 days from now or whenever have a question that you couldn't think of today, absolutely email it to us, and we will respond. We will get together. We meet with Alan and Logan. I think it's every 2 weeks, correct? So bi-weekly.
Yeah, every 2 weeks.
Yeah, we're communicating a lot, so we can easily answer that, and they're very accessible via email. We email them, they answer really quick. So if you have any questions in the next several days, yes, please email either Tom or I, and we'll get that answer for you.
Okay, that okay with everybody?
Yes. I have just one more comment. Kind of tagging on to Mary Ann's comment, and with respect to the density, we can take a look at what's the project that's under construction right now, as it takes shape over there on the 104 units or whatever we approved over there on the old Monty Collins property. You can see how that is shaping up and how that's going to change the look of that area. And to think of, 3 or 4 stories over in this area with that density, I think we should be thinking less density. I don't know that we want to decimate our area simply to comply with the state requirement. That's not practical to begin with, and I like the idea of the mixed use, but not to the levels of density I think that we're talking about. That's just, we're in the early stages. I don't know how and I just don't see how it will ever come to fruition unless you can really get some buy-in from the owners over there. You got to get these owners together, and but hey, I've got no problem with the concept, the idea, and how and when it happens, if it ever happens, that's a different story. But that's okay.
Thank you. Okay. Any other comments on this? Okay, so my recommendation are, let's go ahead and email. Okay, did you want to say something, Commissioner Andrade?
No.
No. Okay. Please go ahead, email questions to Ron and Tom so they can kind of help get them formulated or answered for us. And then if necessary, we can bring it back to have a meeting on those questions as well and anything that comes up. Is that agreeable? All right, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you again.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Items from the Community Development Director.
Again, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to Alan. Thank you for Logan for joining us tonight. Thank you, guys. So really quick, I think Tom will elaborate, but the city went out to RFP to update our housing element. We did have some difficulty landing a company or someone to assist us, but we did finally get a company to assist us. And so we're going to start that process. I believe our first kickoff meeting is hopefully next week. Again, Tom will elaborate, but that is all I have. And I know Tom has a couple items. Yeah, the Chevron, by the way, is getting ready to start construction. The one that down on Siboney that was wanted to put in the car wash, but instead they're going to be just doing the food center or whatever. Oh. So they're going to start building soon. They've submitted plans and all that, so that's moving along. And then, like Ron said, we found an applicant for our grant for doing our housing element. The housing element is due in October. And we were very lucky to find someone to do it at this point, because every city in the entire state has to do it all at the same time. And there's only so many consultants, and all of them are doing multiple housing elements. So we're very happy to have found someone to be able to do this with us. And as part of that housing element, that's where we will have the discussion about that 767 units. The housing element is about finding places for those 767 units. And so we will be discussing that in the future as part of that housing element. So, yeah. And and by the way, Marianne mentioned about fighting the 767. We have appealed to the state, and we lost our appeal. So, yeah. So thank you, Tom. Michael, you got anything?
Not at this time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I'll give it back to you, Chair.
Thank you. One question on that housing, because I don't recall. Can townhouses, condominiums, apartments, can all of that be counted as part of that 760 unit part ADU that they want?
Yes. Yeah, any type of unit.
Mobile parks, all of these can be counted.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
did we get our apartments, 107 apartments there, and our 50 new townhomes excluded out of that so we can add it in?
That went to the last RENA numbers.
But those aren't low income, right? I thought these were
Those are
low.
not low income, so we have quite a lot of low income that they've assigned to us.
Right.
In reading that letter from the Kennedy Group, and they're talking about, you know, providing low income for people who have income of 27,000 a year.
Right.
You know, that's, you know, that works out to an apartment that's going to rent for about maybe $800 a month. I mean, if you kind of take half their rent, you know, half of their income, and let them use half of it to their rent, you're going to be probably around $800, $900 a month. That's non-existent. Who pays for that? I mean, you can't get it at the prices of land and the cost of development. You can't get the return to justify doing it. So,
well, let me remind you that.
Or does the Kennedy Group? Do they fund it? Is that what they do? They come out and they're this coalition. They actually put their money where their mouth is.
They do.
Tom, I'm going to have to shut you down. I'm okay with Commissioner DeVolt's kind of one-sided comments at this point, but we really can't devolve into a full-on conversation of this.
Right, I was gonna say, when we get into the housing element, I believe we can tackle that a little bit more detail.
Can I clarify one thing? Does any of the housing with our shelters count for any of this stuff? Because I know with one of our STEP programs, we do charge them. We're working them their way out. Do those count?
They count, but they've already been built.
No, that's okay. I just wondered how much of this goes into it.
Yeah, they subtract out those when they're coming up with our numbers.
Okay. And that has nothing to do with the homeless shelters that we have to be a part of with Cypress and Buena Park, those numbers?
No.
Okay.
They have monstrous numbers in those other towns. Yeah.
Okay.
We have a pretty low number, which is outrageous, of course, but very lower number.
And if our name is applied to any property as Los Alamitos, even if it's not in our city, can we count that housing?
No.
You know what I was thinking of, the racetrack.
Yeah. Right.
Can't blame me for trying.
Yeah, well, we're going to be the driveway on the way to the racetrack. Yeah.
Yes. So, all right, thank you. Okay, seeing as how that's the director's reports, commission reports, do I have anybody who's got any questions or comments? Commissioner Lowe?
Yeah, so recently, you know, through an applicant, it came to the attention of staff, and then I got involved in doing some research as well. And the research involved looking back at a special meeting from April 16th, 2019, so 2 years ago to this month. And in that meeting, I'm sure you don't recall, but you will recall maybe if Laura Stetson was there, and she was giving a presentation on some proposed planning changes or zoning changes in our R1, R2, R3 zone. And it focused on some of it focused on the parking requirements. And I watched the meeting again, and I also brought up the minutes. And so it's a pretty short summary of the minutes, so I thought I might just read it real quickly. It says, Ms. Stetson summarized the current and proposed residential parking standards. And it took, you know, we spent some good time on it. And towards the end of it, and our minutes here said Commissioner Gross is not in favor of changing the residential parking standards, and we all agreed on that. And at that time, after having that long discussion, we kind of said, well, we don't want to change it. It's like, and we all agreed. It's like, we don't want to change it. And then Les, the community development director, had mentioned, hey, one of the proposals on here is to change it from a use, an R1, R2, R3 use, and go, from zoning, from R1, R2, R3 zoning and the parking standards, we'd rather do it to a use basis, meaning that if it's a single family residence, then the parking standards are X and so forth. So he wanted to go to that use versus R1, R2, R3. And bear with me, I'm getting my point. What happened is that through that process, what happened is that there were some changes that were made that we didn't recommend, and I take the responsibility of not catching that, as we move that up to the city council. One of those, so when we went back and forth on that, we actually kind of caught ourselves in a little bit of a catch-22 in a couple such scenarios there. But the main point is, and this applicant that came to the city, was that on a single-family residence, when we went to more than 4 bedrooms to a 5th bedroom, we had to have a 3rd garage for single-family residences, and we didn't approve that because we kept the old parking requirements for single-family residences, which is two-car garage. On Laura Stetson's proposal, she said, I proposed going to a 3-car garage if we add a 5th bedroom, but we didn't agree with that. But that ended up in our zoning code. So my proposal tonight is that maybe we could agendize this if we have at least 3 commissioners that were willing to take a look at that again, that we can agendize this for a future meeting. And Tom may have more to speak on this, or Michael may have more to speak on this, but that was kind of my request tonight.
Thank you.
Okay.
Michael, Tom, either of you like to make a comment?
Yeah, I did. I'll be the first to admit I don't recall the exact background on this, but the recommendation made by Commissioner Lowe in terms of the procedure for bringing this forward as a discussion item and addressing it and considering what would potentially be an amendment to the code would be the appropriate pathway to bring this back before the commission.
Okay, thank you. And Tom? Do you have any comments?
I guess the time now would be to find if enough of the commission agreed to bring this back, and then direct staff to do that.
Okay, so first, thank you, Commissioner Lowe, for the amount of time and effort you put into this to bring it back to our attentions. Could we have a roll call on whether they'd like to bring it back as an agendized item, please?
Actually, Chair Gross, if I could I ask for a motion in a second
Oh,
and
I'm
then
sorry,
a roll
that'd
call
be
vote, please?
So,
yes.
I can make the motion to agendize this item to review the residential parking standards that we also reviewed from the April 16, 2019 meeting, that we can review that.
Do I have a second?
Single-family residence?
I'll second.
Thank you.
Good.
Can we have a roll call?
Chair Gross,
Aye.
Vice Chair DeBolt,
Aye.
Commissioner Andrade,
Aye.
Commissioner Quilty,
Aye.
Commissioner Lowe,
Aye.
Commissioner Riley,
Aye.
and Commissioner Suffolk-Canning, absent.
Thank you. And again, thank you, Commissioner Lowe.
Oh, thanks. Can I ask one more thing? I don't know if this, or we're done. And maybe this is for Michael, but in these situations where we have something like this that wasn't the intent, but does get changed, is there any avenue for staff on this to work on something like this for the applicant? And on that same motion, is there any way to have a city initiated, such as maybe a variance or something like that the city can initiate that variance, or does it have to come from an applicant? And as far as fees to do that, because there definitely is some discrepancies here in that code. Is there anything like that, or is this we have to stick with this procedure?
Yeah, the procedure that would be required to correct any discrepancies would be a code amendment, and that can be initiated either by the Planning Commission in this instance, or in some cases a private residence. But that would be the pathway for making these types of corrections. If after the fact we realize the document that went up for vote and was approved perhaps doesn't reflect prior discussions of the commission and perhaps the intention of the commission when that vote was taken, that's somewhat just of a code cleanup that we would need to pursue. A variance is likely not a good fit for this type of situation, because the concept of a variance is that the development standards are perfectly okay, but there's some unique condition, physical condition of a property that makes it unduly burdensome for a property owner to comply with our development standards. And, you know, I don't know the facts of this particular property, but I would suspect that it's more of a question of the general application of development standards across all single-family residences that you're concerned with here.
Okay, understood. This one does have some unique circumstances, but anyways, we'll go that route. So,
Thank you. Any other commissioners have any comments? Can I ask what the Cypress Los Alamitos racetrack has some fencing up right now? Do you know what's going on over that direction? It was where they had, on the racetrack itself, where they had the parking of the trucks from the, oh, I can't think of the GIF, I think it was.
Yeah, I can address that. They are building what's called the Cypress Town Center. Looks an awful lot like our center that we were going to build over here. So they're building shops, and they will be building behind that a little bit of a residential area, apartments, and another hotel, and a movie theater. And then behind that will be, I mean, it'll be more retail up front and residential toward the back. That's what they're doing. And that was owned by Cypress, that property. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's see, I do know that the Thai massage, I hope I got it right, is open, correct?
Yes.
They are open. Anything else that we've had? I can't think of anything else that's come to us lately that's open or working. And it looks like all the projects are coming along beautifully. I know that the 107 apartments, they're going up very fast, and it looks like the Olson project is complete down there.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for all your hard work. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your support. Have a good evening.
Okay.
Right.
Night.
All right, good night.